And welcome to this special edition of CGN TV's Interviews. And my name is Pastor Byun, and I am pleased to be your host for today. You know, they say that leadership is influence, but also in Scripture we see that we are called to be salt and light in this world, and that is also about being an influence within our world and our society for the glory of God. And in this society today and in our generation, we are facing a leadership crisis, and we are also facing an influence crisis through the church. And we are seeking ways in which we can still be in the world and yet not of the world. And for today, God has brought a special guest to us, Dr. Michael Lindsey, who has been an expert and a student of leadership in this realm for quite a number of years. Currently, Dr. Michael Lindsey, he is the president of Gordon College in Boston in the United States, and he has been an international leader and a mentor for many throughout the world. And we have invited him to share his insights and his wisdom to address the church in Korea on this leadership void. He has done doctoral work at Princeton Theological Seminary, but also in Oxford University. And he has conducted the largest interview-based study of senior leaders in American society. And I believe that part of the reason why God has allowed him to study this is so that he might be raised up for this hour to be a true leader for the church, not just in the United States, but for around the world. And in a moment, we'll hear from him, but right now I want to introduce a very special video that will introduce our speaker and his school right now.
미국 매사추세츠 웬엠시에 위치한 고든대학교. 고든대학교는 1889년 콩고로 떠나는 선교사들을 훈련하기 위해 A.J. 고든 목사에 의해 설립된 크리스천 대학이다. 올해로 설립 123주년을 맞은 고든대학교는 인류를 위한 충직한 리더십을 목표로 믿음과 실력, 섬김 정신을 두루 지닌 크리스천 리더들을 키워내고 있다. 제8대 총장에 취임한 마이클 린지 총장은 프린스턴 대학에서 사회학 박사학위를, 2006년에는 세계 사회학 대회에서 35세 미만의 유망한 사회학자로 선정되기도 했다. 그는 지난 8년 동안 지미 카터, 조지 부시 전 미국 대통령 등 세계적 리더 550여 명을 만나 그들의 리더십과 성공 비결을 연구하였고 저술과 강연 활동을 활발히 하고 있다. 높은 학업적 성취와 크리스천 리더십을 갖춘 인물로 평가받고 있는 마이클 린지 총장. 그의 열정적 교육관과 비전 가득한 라이프 스토리가 지금 바로 시작됩니다.
Dr. Michael Lindsey, it's a pleasure for you to join us today, and it's an honor for me to meet you. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience for today?
Sure. Thank you very much, Pastor Eddie. It's wonderful to be here. So I'm Michael Lindsey. I grew up in the American South and met my wife in Texas. We've been married for 18 years. I serve as the president of Gordon College, a role that I've had for about 3 years now. We love Gordon. It's been a wonderful community. We're located just north of Boston, and we get a chance to live on campus. We have 3 daughters, Elizabeth, who's 9, and then twin daughters, Caroline and Emily. And I very much view my work at Gordon as a part of my calling to the ministry, and it's a great privilege to be here today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Is this your first time to Korea?
No, actually, I've been here 3 times over the last 18 months. Oh. So we have a large segment of our student body are from Korea. And so this is a wonderful place for me to come back and connect with alumni and with parents as well as with prospective students.
Okay, wow, that's really encouraging to hear that our country has a great presence in your great school. And are there any particular reasons why you've come to Korea this time around?
So I'm here to speak at a couple of leadership conferences that are here, as well as to visit a couple of schools where we have special relationships, as well as to get a chance to come and speak at Henri, which I'm very excited about doing tomorrow, and to be able to connect with those folks who love Gordon College and are interested in learning more about the institution.
Oh, great. And can you tell us a little bit about some of your first impressions of Korea when you came?
Korea is an amazing country, right? So this is a country where faith flourishes in significant ways. Coming from the States, I'm struck by how much the Christian influence you can see within the corridors of power here. Last night I had dinner with a member of the National Assembly, and I can see that there is a vibrant faith dimension here. So Korea is exciting, I think, for those of us who are interested in having more Christians to have influence and to be salt and light. It's also an amazing country because this is a place of great innovation and creativity. So I'm a big fan of KTX, and I think that the engineering that has designed that has been something that we in the States could learn and appreciate greatly. So I love being here.
Oh, I'm glad to hear. So you're currently the president of Gordon College, and I hear that one of your primary missions of the school is to raise up leaders within this generation. Can you expand a little bit about how that came to be the mission of your school?
Yeah, so Gordon has been around for about 125 years. We started as a missionary training school in Boston in 1889. And we've been trying to help serve the global church by developing and educating leaders for the next generation over that entire span of time. We describe it as faithful leadership for the common good. So we really desire to produce young people who are full of faith and who have a sense of leadership that serves not just their own interest, but also the interest of others. And so whether they're studying philosophy or economics, studying biology or pre-med or interested in engineering, we want to try and encourage students who will be able to take their Christian convictions and be able to serve Christ in their respective callings.
Wow, that is amazing that it's been around that long. How have you been able to maintain the faithful foundation of the Word of God throughout those many years? Because there are many schools who started off as Christian, but we see today they've a little bit lost their way in terms of honoring the inerrancy of the Word of God.
Yeah, so many institutions of higher learning really grew out of the church. Higher education worldwide started out of the church. The cathedral schools in Paris and Oxford, that was the beginnings of what we know as university education worldwide. I think that one of the things that makes Gordon special is that we've always had a deep connection to the church, and that we believe that we're here to serve the church. And so in my role as president and also working with my colleagues on the faculty, we want to encourage active church engagement in our students. We want the young people who are coming to Gordon to be serious about their faith. Gordon is a very unusual institution in that there's probably 150 Christian colleges in the U.S., but less than 5 that actually require you to be a professing Christian to actually be admitted to the program. And we require that because we believe that in order for us to be a vibrant Christian community, there has to be a core shared sense of belief. And so that's what we try to do at Gordon. And then to be able to use that shared sense of community and belief to be able to serve a world that has very different opinions. Boston is full of people who don't necessarily share our Christian convictions, so we have lots of chances to be salt and light.
Right. And in our audience for CGN TV, we have quite a number of Christian high schools, colleges, and universities who watch as well. And we actually are very close with a lot of the presidents of these schools. Do you have any words of advice for them as to what they can do to really maintain the faithfulness to truth and the gospel for even beyond their term as servants of their school?
It's a great question. I've become convicted that I, as a leader, need to have a more active prayer life, and my prayer life needs to be much more intentional. Just this past week, I was reading an article by the chaplain to the U.S. Senate, Chaplain Black, and he has a laminated card of all of the 100 senators and their spouses, so he can pray for them by name every day. And be convicted that that's the kind of prayer life I need to have as well. I think that the way in which you maintain your commitment to Christ is by that active devotional life and where you're encouraging it in your community as well. So I think as the leader goes, so goes the institution. So my encouragement would be to all of those folks who are serving at Christian institutions worldwide, that they would be in the Word and that they would actively try and encourage folks who are in their institutions to have an active walk with the Lord.
Okay, thank you. You appear very young, and I assume that you are relatively young. And I also heard that you are one of the youngest presidents to ever take on your position at Gordon College. Can you share how that happened? Because I also heard that initially you didn't want that position. What changed your mind?
So I am the youngest president of a nationally ranked college in the U.S. The students never confuse me for one of their own, but I do work out with them in the gym, so that helps keep me a little bit more youthful. I feel very much coming to Gordon is an answer to a prayer that actually I began praying as a 17-year-old. But initially when the search committee reached out to me, I thought, it's a crazy idea. I'm very young for a college president. I hadn't had the typical sort of career path that individuals go through when they're preparing for the college presidency. It's a big job. Gordon, we have about 500 employees altogether, about 2,000 students. Our annual budget's about $75 million. So wow. It's a large undertaking. And when I was in my previous position, I had a much smaller area of responsibility. But in God's providence, they asked me if I would pray about it. And, what am I supposed to say? No, of course. So we began praying. And as my wife and I prayed about it, our hearts just began turning toward Gordon. And in God's providence, it's turned out to be the best decision of our lives.
You just mentioned that it started with a prayer that you prayed when you were 17. Can you share what that prayer was?
Yeah, so as a 17-year-old, I made a public commitment to going into the ministry, but I did not feel called to being a pastor. And I didn't have enough understanding, even at that time, to make sense of what does a calling to ministry look like if you don't want to be a pastor and don't feel like the Lord's calling you to be a pastor. Nor did I necessarily feel called to the missions field. But I went forward at my church service in Jackson, Mississippi, and said to the pastor, I want to be used by the Lord, and I feel like He's calling me to some kind of ministry, but I'm not sure what that looks like. And it took another 17 or 18 years before I finally figured out that part of my calling was to being able to serve in Christian higher education. And I can now look back and see that all along the way, the Lord prepared me for the role that I have today. It's a much bigger job than I ever expected, a lot harder than I ever anticipated, but I can see that there have been a lot of steps along the way that have prepared me for just this moment.
Well, I could imagine a lot of our listeners being so encouraged by what you just shared, because in Korean culture, in Korean church culture, I should say, specifically, most people think of ministry as I'm going to be a pastor or a missionary. But you've shown, for some people, I think, another avenue. Can you actually maybe encourage some of our listeners who do wrestle with a similar thing that you are also struggling with as a 17-year-old? It's like, okay, I want to serve the Lord in ministry, but clearly I don't see myself as a pastor or a missionary. Can you speak to them a little bit as well?
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to think about the ministry to which God calls us. It can be very unique. It could be something that works in parachurch organizations or in supporting organizations within the church. Lots of different ministry opportunities that are out there. Today, much more so than there were even 20 years ago. And I think that the key thing is that you want to commit your life to the Lord and praying that He'll prepare you for the right moments that come along the way. One of the people that I interviewed for this big project said to me that we understand life looking backward, but we have to live it going forward. And that's certainly been true in my own life. So I think it's really about a daily yielding of our will and saying, Lord, I really want to be used by you, and I want to not waste a single day. I want today to count in what you're trying to do in my life and how you might be able to use me. I also think it's really important to find mentors who can encourage you. And I had a mentor in high school who worked at a Christian college. And so by seeing his life and his example, I began to appreciate perhaps how the Lord might be using me down the road.
Okay. You mentioned mentoring as a crucial part of it. How is that played out in the education and the discipleship of your student body at Gordon College?
So I'll tell you about one program that we have that I'm really excited about. So I spent 10 years studying leadership in lots of different organizations. And I became convinced that the most impressive leadership development program in the U.S. is called the White House Fellowship. It was started by President Johnson in 1965. And they have about 700 alumni of the program. Thousands of people will apply each year, and only 15 or so will be chosen. It's more competitive than the Rhodes Scholarship. Incredibly effective program. It's a one-year fellowship where people move to Washington in their 20s or 30s, they resign their positions, and they go work for a cabinet secretary. That 1 year becomes a transformative catalyst for their leadership development. And alums of the program have become CEOs of some of the largest enterprises, college presidents, members of the U.S. cabinet and the Senate and the House. So it's a very effective program. 32% of the folks who graduate from this program go on to lead a major enterprise, which is a staggering statistic. So I thought that that was a pretty impressive program, and we have launched a program at Gordon called the Gordon Presidential Fellowship, which is modeled on the White House Fellowship. It's been great. We actually had the director of the White House program come to visit us this summer because she wanted to see how do you make this work for college students. And it's not rocket science. We figured out there were 4 key elements that made a real difference, and we've tried to incorporate that. And so far, we're in our second class of students, and it's going well. It's the way in which we try to mentor those students and help them go to the next level.
Wow. So for the White House Fellowship, they would spend time with governmental leaders. What would the students in your school, who would they be spending time with in that program?
So for the White House Fellowship, they spend time with the U.S. cabinet. So at Gordon, they spend time with the Gordon cabinet. Okay. So the president and all of the senior leaders, we have about 7 of us on the cabinet that are doing the major leadership role of the college. And each of us have a student who works directly with us for a year.
Wow.
They work somewhere between 10 and 20 hours a week. They literally office in the same office as their principal, as they're called. So I have a guy who sits in my office at the conference table. He listens to my end of the phone conversations. He sits in on all the meetings that I'm conducting. He sees what my life is like and how I manage all the information that comes my way. Because we believe that leadership is as much caught as it is taught. And so we want to expose it, expose these young people to what it is that it's like when you're trying to serve as a college president, and it's been a lot of fun. They also get a chance to work on some really major projects for us. So they do some day-to-day activities, but also some longer-range projects. One of my presidential fellows right now is helping me write a sermon that I'm giving in chapel in a couple of weeks. Last year, I had one fellow prepare a major report that was presented to our Board of Trustees. And one trustee said to me, was this done by McKinsey & Company, the major consulting firm? I said, no, it was done by my presidential fellow. He tried to hire him then.
Wow.
And said he was really great. So it's been a lot of fun.
Wow, sounds like such a unique opportunity for these students.
It's the only program in the world that's for college students that's modeled on the White House Fellowship.
Wow. Great opportunity. Now, in your study of leadership for the past 10 plus years, what would you say are some of the challenges that this generation of believers have to face as Christians, as leaders, as we go into this new era of, in some ways, moral uncertainty, especially for the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that probably the biggest threat or challenge to those who are faithful leaders is the religious and cultural pluralism that we see around us. So we've lost the sense that there is a shared core sense of beliefs that unites our society. And so people don't share basic core convictions about what does it mean to be human and how do we think about treating other people. There's not the same regard for virtues. It's now that the cardinal virtue in our society is tolerance. It's not love, it's not honesty, it's not wisdom, it's not integrity, it's just tolerating the other person. Right. And so I think the challenge for us is how can you be both open to people who are very different than ourselves and yet still very faithful to your core beliefs? That's a tough road to hoe, I have to say, in my own life and in the work we're doing at Gordon, figuring out how we can be both open and yet still faithful.
Right. In many ways, the U.S. seems to be a step or two ahead of cultural shifts and changes that happen. And several years later, Asia and Korea seem to face those similar challenges. What would you say to the Korean church as to what we can do for our younger generation to really raise up leaders with a Christian ethos of how to live in our society?
I think we have to make sure to capture the imagination of young people, that we can tap into their concerns around issues of justice, truth, and beauty, and for them to see that the gospel has a lot to speak to those kinds of issues. One of the things that I think that we're learning in the U.S. that perhaps could be applicable to Korea is that there's not a shared sense of convictions among millennial young people, those who came of age in the last 10, 12 years. And so we have to figure out ways to connect their deeper longings for what the world ought to be with the gospel. We can't assume that they understand it. In the U.S., biblical illiteracy is at a record high. You actually have English literature teachers having to teach biblical allusions, like the apple from the Garden of Eden. They don't recognize in Shakespeare's work that the apple is a symbol for temptation or for evil. They don't see the snake. They don't understand the symbolism there. So the basic biblical knowledge we really don't know. One of the things that I think that Korea could actually set the pace for the rest of the world, however, is that there is a genuine evangelistic fervor in this country that many countries that once were very serious about their faith have walked away from. I think that energy and drive for helping to share the good news is something that Korea can help set the pace for global Christianity worldwide.
Okay. For Korean culture, education is very high value. But unfortunately, for a lot of parents, because of cultural pressure, they view only an elite school, for example, a Seoul National University, as the sign of success for their child. And unfortunately, that mentality has also crept into the church. But clearly, not everyone can or should go to just one school. And so there does seem to be an awareness right now that, you know what, maybe we need to raise our kids differently in this generation. With you being the president of one of the top and one of the oldest Christian colleges in the U.S., can you speak to the parents of this nation, maybe sharing the importance of Christian education, not just for elementary school age, but especially and even when they graduate from high school and enter the college, university age? Why is it important for Christian education to still be a part of their lives during that age period?
So, Eddie, I'm the product of some of the finest institutions of higher learning in the world. I did my PhD at Princeton, did graduate work at Oxford, have a deep appreciation for those institutions. But they are different places today than they were even 10 years ago. It is very hard for a young man to keep his way pure in those kinds of campus environments. If you want to see a recent example, there was an article written by a Dartmouth undergraduate, published in Rolling Stone about a year ago. The title of the article was Confessions of an Ivy League Frat Boy. And in it, he basically describes his experience as an undergraduate at Dartmouth, one of the top institutions in the world. And he tells a story about how every Friday and Saturday night he got as drunk as he possibly could, would be passed out, how he had casual sexual relations with all of these different women. And in the end, it left him with a deep sense of emptiness. I don't think that most Christian parents who are encouraging their young people to go to these elite institutions have any idea of how much more pervasive the hidden curriculum of these schools is compared to the stated curriculum. Young people are far more shaped by their peers, by the activities that happen on the weekends, far more shaped by that than they are by the classes that they take with professors. And the truth of the matter is at most elite universities, undergraduates are very low on the pecking order of priorities. So at all of the top tier global institutions, they're focusing on the scholarly output of their faculty and of doctoral students. Undergraduates are typically taught by teaching assistants, and premier faculty rarely have a lot of interaction with those undergraduates. You might, in your freshman year, at Princeton, for example, you might have one class where you're directly engaging with a faculty member, senior faculty member, but it typically doesn't happen. And so you're paying $50,000 a year for this elite education, And in the process, these young people are really losing their core sense of beliefs. Now, I don't think you should choose a Christian college out of fear of what could happen at the other schools. I actually think that what you can find at a Christian college today, at least I can speak at what happens at Gordon, it's on par academically with what happens in the undergraduate classroom of the best institutions in the world. I know that because I've taught at those kinds of places. And I'm convinced that what's happening in our classrooms at Gordon are certainly on par with what was happening in my classroom at Princeton. The difference is that at Gordon, we care so much about the students that we want to nurture their faith lives as well. We want to expose them to the tough questions. So we don't provide easy answers. It's not a 4-year indoctrination to Christian theology. Instead, we raise real problems and real challenges and help them to see how the gospel can help address those answers, whether it be in philosophy or history or literature, economics, or the sciences. I think in the end, it's the best kind of education a family could invest in. I'll give one last bit of advice. For any family who's thinking about sending their students to a secular school for undergrad, I think that they should insist that their son or daughter spends a Friday or a Saturday night in the residence halls of those campuses before they decide. I think you'll learn a lot from that experience.
Yeah, as being one who also went to a secular university, I could testify it's a different world.
It is.
When the weekend comes.
Yeah.
But what would you say in response to, I know some parents might be thinking, isn't it sheltering my kid too much? Isn't just having my child grow up in the church on weekends good enough? Why should we also consider Christian college as well?
So I think 50 years ago, you could make the case that Christian colleges were these little enclaves of Christendom where you didn't have a lot of interaction with folks in different opinions. But certainly at Gordon, that's not the case. So we have students who are engaged in getting to know undergraduates at Harvard and Boston University and Wellesley and MIT. Our faculty are doing research with those kind of colleagues. There is far that you could say that Gordon is a sheltered environment. We work really hard to be part of that leavening influence. So I think that perhaps that may have been the case in a previous generation, but today most Christian colleges are pretty deeply engaged in the main intellectual currents. And I think parents ought to look to make sure that they're choosing a school that's located in a global capital of some kind of activity. So I happen to think Gordon is perfectly situated because being in Boston, Boston's a global capital for higher education, home to more college students per capita than any other city on the planet, home to more institutions of higher learning than any other place in the world. So I'm a big fan of Gordon and think it's the right kind of place. But I think as you look at Christian colleges, you might be surprised they are not nearly as insular as they once were.
Right. And with your background in leadership, who are some of the leaders that have greatly influenced you in seeking to raise up this next generation of leaders as well? Who influenced you with that heart?
Probably one of the mentors that made a real difference in my life was a guy named George Gallup. George, his father, founded the Gallup poll, which is the world's leading public opinion research firm based in Princeton, New Jersey. I got a chance to work directly for Mr. Gallup, and he had a tremendous impact on me. We ended up writing 2 books together. We did a number of media appearances. My very first time on CNN was with Mr. Gallup, and got a chance to do a lot of public speaking together. But I learned from George that it's entirely possible to have a name that everybody recognizes, to have a position of influence, and to wield true power, and yet to be a man of prayer, of faith, and of humility. He modeled that for me. And so to the extent on my better days when I try to represent that, I'd like to think it's because of his influence in my life.
Wow, what a blessing to have that type of person in your life. You mentioned a couple of books that you've written. Can you share with our audience a little bit about those books?
Sure. So I did 2 books with Mr. Gallup. One is called Surveying the Religious Landscape, which is an overview of Gallup's research over 70, 80 years on faith and culture. And it was a lot of fun. And the second book was looking at, it's called The Gallup Guide, a reality check for 21st century churches. So it's really written for church leaders of how they would use the tool of survey research to help them with church planting and with serving their congregations. We provided about 15 actual surveys Gallup had done for different faith-based clients that they could replicate. So it was a lot of fun. My most recent book was called Faith in the Halls of Power. It was an analysis of looking at the role of evangelical faith in the lives of about 360 prominent Americans. I had a chance to interview all of them and hear their stories. It was an amazing array. I got a chance to interview former Presidents Carter and Bush, as well as a number of other CEOs and major leaders. And in fact, there's a wonderful South Korea connection President Carter told me that he really tried to bear witness to his faith to other world leaders. And he actually came to Seoul at the end of his administration in the late 70s, and he witnessed to President Park here.
Oh, wow.
And he said that was one of his most significant times where he tried to bring his faith to bear in making a difference in the life of another world leader.
Wow, fascinating. Wow, what a blessing. Of those 300 plus leaders that you interviewed, I know we don't have time to talk about all of them. I'm sure they were all interesting and fascinating. Is there one or two people that really stood out to you, that really showed you there's something unique about this person?
Yeah. One person that really impressed me is a guy named David Grizzle. Now, you've never heard his name, but he actually has changed our world. In the late 90s, he was a senior executive with Continental Airlines, and he brokered a landmark deal with one of their competitors, Northwest Airlines, where they would sell seats on each other's planes. And they recognized reciprocal frequent flyer benefits. It actually began the domino effect where we've seen this consolidation of the airline industry worldwide. It was the beginning of the process by which Korean Air would be in a partnership with Delta Airlines, which would be in a partnership with Air France. All of these global carriers selling seats on each other's planes. Well, he started that. And the stock market responded very favorably. In the late 90s, the stock for Continental went through the roof. And so all the executives at Continental were entitled to a very large bonus at the end of the year, including David. He was entitled to about a $2 million bonus. But David is a man of deep faith, and he and his wife decided they didn't need that extra money. Instead, they wanted to give it away. They wanted to give it away to a Christian charity called World Vision to try and serve kids around the world. But he realized that if he received that as income, about 40% of that would be taxed, and so that would be less money he could give to the charity. So he went to the chief lawyer, the general counsel of Continental, and said, I want to try something different. I'd like to give back my bonus to the company and have it directed to the corporate philanthropy to go to the charity that I'm interested in. Well, the lawyer had never heard of an executive who wanted to give back their bonus, so they had to check the law books to see if that was allowed, but sure enough it was. And that's what they did. But the amazing thing is that then David had the moral authority to go to his colleagues, because they all knew that he was the one who caused the stock price to go well up through the roof and allowed them to get this into your bonus. And so he went one by one, approaching them and said, you know what, Eddie, you don't really need that money. Why don't you give it away with me? And you can do something great. It'll make you look good. It'll make the company look good. And it'll actually serve the charities that you care about the most. That year, the senior executives of Continental Airlines gave away $7 million of their end-of-year bonuses.
Wow.
It's a great example of faithful leadership working for the common good.
Wow, that's true leadership in action. Thank you, Dr. Lindsey. Right now we're going to take a break and we're going to see a video clip about the needs of this generation concerning what they're looking for leaders in this hour of need. And so after this clip, we'll return back to our special speaker for today.
정직해야죠. 정직하면은 잘못된 점이나 뭐 생각이 틀릴 수도 있겠지만 정직하지 않음으로써 사회가 자꾸 혼탁해지니까 그러면 신뢰가 없어지고 그래서 사회가 다 엉망이 되는 것 같아요.
네, 시대 존경받는 리더는 일단 인품이 가장 중요하다고 생각합니다. 일단 리더로서의 자질을 가장 많이 평가해야 될 것 같고요. 그 다음에 인품에 걸맞는 학식이 겸비되면 가장 좋을 것 같습니다.
저는 그 사람이 주장하는 그 말과 그 사람이 행동하는 그 삶의 모습이 일치해야 된다고 생각합니다.
제가 생각하기에 진실을 찾는 거, 진리를 찾는 거, 정말 참된 진리를 찾으면 뭔가 솔직해지고 그리고 자연스러워지고 그리고 또 모든 약속도 지키고 그리고 또 남들도 생각해 줄 수 있고 배려해 줄 수 있고 존경해 줄 수 있고
사람의 겉모습이라든가 뭐 스펙을 보고 뽑는 게 아니라 그 사람의 가치라든가 그 사람이 갖고 있는 뭐 진심, 뭐 그런 열정 이런 걸 봐줘서 뭐 그 사람 겉으로 말고 그 사람을 좀 더 진심으로 봐주는 그런 눈이 필요한 것 같아요.
So it seems in the growth of a leader, having a mentor seems pretty important. And we have heard that you know some secrets of finding a good mentor. Can you share some of those secrets with us?
Well, I think one of the key things is be willing to take a risk. So I encourage the students at Gordon to actually approach the great leaders who come to our campus. Every year, we probably have 15, 20, 25 very accomplished leaders in different walks of life. And so I tell the young people, go up and introduce yourself, shake their hand, see if you can get their business card, begin to develop a relationship. I also encourage them to never forget the power of a handwritten note. So we live in a day and age where everybody is texting or emailing, but if you actually take the time to write out a note to a senior leader, it stands out to them. So take a risk and actually trying to build a relationship. I'm not a really big fan of formalized mentoring programs where you pair up somebody, one mentor with a younger person. I think actually mentorship really grows organically, naturally out of a relationship. So you look for ways in which you can build a relationship, and typically that occurs through common interests. So if you're interested in becoming a world-class tennis player, you're trying to develop relationships with people who are great tennis players. If you're interested in becoming a pastor, it's important to develop relationship with great pastors. Helping to take the initiative, go out and meet those people and begin to develop the relationship can really pay off. The other thing that I encourage young people to do is to pray. I think that we don't pray enough, asking the Lord, would you please send somebody into my life who can make a real difference? And so for those folks in your audience who are looking for a mentor, I tell them to take that to the Lord, make it a daily prayer request. And also pray that he would open up your eyes so that you could see how you could make a difference in somebody else's life. Many times we are actually the answer to somebody else's prayer. And I think we have to be available to try and do that, even as we ask the Lord to make other people available to help us.
That's great. How about then for current leaders who are maybe thinking, maybe I should mentor someone? What advice could you give to them?
I think the most important thing is for a leader to find one or two young people that they can really pour into and show love to in a particular season. So over the course of my own life, I've tried to sort of take an interest in one or two people along the way and to try and help them. And sometimes I help them for many years. Other times I help them just for a particular season. But I'm always trying to ask the Lord to bring into my life those people that I can help. The other thing is that, oftentimes you can want to be helping somebody, but maybe you're not the right person. Maybe you don't click with them, you don't have the same personality type. It's interesting because the research shows that mentors and young people tend to work the best when they have a similar outlook, a similar shared faith conviction, and also a similar personality. So like attracts like. So look for young people who seem to have the same kind of energy or drive or the same kind of interests that you do, because through those kind of shared interests, maybe you like the same soccer team or maybe you like the same kind of music, through those you can actually develop really great mentoring relationships. The other thing, when I'm actually hiring faculty, I'm always looking for in people who might come to join us and trying to see what kind of mentors they'll be, is I'm looking for their capacity to love. I'm really interested to see, are they invested enough in the young people who they want to teach that they care about them, the whole life of the young person, not just what they do in the classroom, but who they become 10 to 20 years from now. The mark of a great mentor is somebody who has a deep capacity to love.
One of the things I've really appreciated that you mentioned a few times during our interview so far is the importance of prayer in your personal life and also how you approach your work and ministry. Can you just share a little bit maybe about your devotional life and how you do carve out that time between you and the Lord?
Well, I'm still a man in process on this front, so I'm not nearly as faithful in prayer as I want to be or as I should be. But I developed a habit as a young person of creating an intercessory prayer list and dividing it up and creating index cards where I pray for people. Basically, one day a week I pray for a certain group of people, and I try to vary that up. I find that helps me be more creative. It feels fresher in my prayer life, and about twice a year I change it up and revisit, continue to pray for some people and add some new people. The Lord answers some prayers, so I move on to other things. And I find that that's been really helpful in my prayer life. For me, my daily devotions work the best in the mornings as I'm getting ready. So as I'm getting myself ready for the day, dressing, taking a shower, I find that that's actually time when I really pray. My kids are usually not interacting. Either they're asleep or they're watching cartoons or something. So that gives me some really good time with the Lord. I also think it's really important to have an active time of reading the Bible. And so for me, having it on my iPhone helps a lot. And I try to also, I usually eat lunch at my desk. And so oftentimes I'll use that as occasion to read scripture while I'm reading, thinking, meditating, trying to honor the Lord even in the workday.
Okay. For a lot of my friends who went to seminary, they would often say it was a challenge to maintain my devotional life. They felt the academic rigor would dry up their spiritual life. Are there things that Gordon College has in place within its structure or culture that would actually guard against that type of thing happening for the spiritual lives of the student body?
That's a great point. I do think there's a possibility of that occurring. The spiritual disciplines, however, are really great in helping us to channel our energy in devotional life in a way different than sort of our scholarly inquiry. So if I'm approaching a text as a student in a New Testament class, so if I'm reading Mark's Gospel, I read that in a slightly different way than I do when I'm reading it devotionally. And so what we try to do is to encourage and inculcate spiritual disciplines. So one that I think is really important that most young people have moved away from, at least in the US, is scripture memory. And so I've tried to encourage our sports teams. Actually, we have 20 varsity sports at Gordon. And so I reached out to the coaches earlier this year and said, I'd love for your team to choose a passage of scripture that you're going to try and memorize as a team and to build that discipline in the lives of those young people. It's a small, simple step, but I think it's a way in which the devotional life can look different than the academic life. And I do think that's important.
That's great. For the different challenges that this generation does face as believers, as influencers, as leaders, can you share some stories as to how strong leaders in your life have overcome these challenges that they've faced?
There's an amazing guy named Mike Ullman who's had a profound influence on my own life. Mike is a outstanding leader. He was chosen as the chief financial officer at the University of Cincinnati at age 29.
Wow.
It's an institution that has 40,000 students. I mean, just an amazing job to get as a 29-year-old. He's gone on, he's been the CEO of Macy's, the CEO of duty-free shops, all the duty-free shops you see in the airports. He was the CEO of that.
Wow.
He was the CEO of Wharf Holdings in Hong Kong, which is the largest commercial real estate holder in the entire city of Hong Kong. He was the CEO of Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, so the luxury goods conglomerate based in Paris. He's now the CEO of JCPenney. And Mike is an amazing example to me because despite the tremendous success that he's enjoyed, when he was CEO, so this is his second time to be the CEO of JCPenney, he retired, they brought in somebody else, and they lost $1 billion during that year. So they brought Mike back, and he's recovering the company. But Mike has this amazing ability to be enormously talented, enormously gifted as a leader, and yet remarkably humble. If he were to sit in church, you wouldn't know. There's no airs about him. He doesn't try and posture himself as a leader. I think that one of the things that our young people really resent about leaders is when they're trying to convince the other person how important they are. And instead, Mike's approach is far more humble. It's a far more gracious demeanor. He's really committed to trying to serve those people around him. So he does simple things like once a month, he holds a leadership seminar for a day every month where he's trying to get to know associates who are at much lower levels in the company and to be able to work with them. Well, that's been a tremendously effective tool because word has spread. The CEO of this large enterprise really cares about me personally. So he's been a great example and encouragement to me. I'm very gratified that he's joined our board of trustees at Gordon and his daughter Maddie is a freshman at our school. Mike is a great encouragement to me and a great role model.
What would you say would be some of the ways to encourage younger leaders to grow into that type of leader? As you said, a lot of times they're striving for self-recognition or self-ambition, what are some guidelines you could give to young leaders to say, these are the steps or thoughts that you want to have to really go in the direction of God-honoring leadership?
So I think you actually have to be intentional to make sure that you're not always about self-promotion, especially when you're climbing. So one bit of advice that I got that I've tried to incorporate in my own life is to have an intentional practice of trying to use whatever influence that you might have at that particular moment to help other people. So I started a practice about 10 years ago. I keep a pretty organized system of files in my inbox. So I probably get a couple hundred emails a day, and I file different things. Well, I have a folder called Assisting Others, where it's emails of people who have asked me to help them or where I'm initiating help. And about every 6 months, I go in to check the size of that box because I want to make sure that I'm actually helping people in various ways. Sometimes it's helping them get a job. Sometimes it's writing a letter of recommendation. Other times it's introducing them to someone. Sometimes it's helping them by offering a word of encouragement. My mom taught me early on the importance of writing encouraging notes. So I try to do that and to incorporate that into my life. I mean, these are small things that I do, but I think that they're good examples for young people as well. I think that many of our college students don't realize how much they could really bless somebody else by taking an interest. So it's a matter of being intentional. Otherwise, we get too busy with our own lives and we forget we're really here to serve other people.
As the president of Gordon College and now being a part of that school for a few years, can you share what are some surprises that you've learned about being in that role that maybe you didn't expect? But also maybe a challenge that you realize, this is a challenge that I did not expect that I'm going to have to deal with in the coming years. Could you share about that?
So probably the most interesting thing about serving as a college president is that you spend a majority of your time working on things that nobody ever finds out about. You work on two kinds of things. One is that you try to keep bad things that are happening from becoming public. So you're trying to solve personnel problems or trying to solve issues before they rise up. You spend a lot of time anticipating what could go wrong and trying to arrange it so that the wrong thing doesn't happen. So you spend a lot of time working on keeping bad things from becoming either public or from materializing into reality. The other thing is that you spend a lot of time working on very, very good things that in the end fall apart. And so you're not going to announce that I spent the last 6 months working on a possible relationship with this institution and in the end it didn't work. So I don't talk about those kinds of things. So the iceberg effect is very true in leadership, that the majority of the time when you're leading an enterprise is devoted to things that people never see below the surface. And maybe that's good and right, but it's hard because a lot of people are wondering, what are you doing? What's keeping you busy? When in fact you're actually spending a lot of time working on those kinds of issues. A challenge that I did not expect is just how much wisdom is needed when dealing with people. This is my first time to lead an enterprise where I've got 500 people that I'm responsible for. And I've learned that just because one strategy of communicating with an employee works for one person does not mean that it works for anybody else. And so you have to develop a very wide array of tools at your disposal. And that's been challenging for me. Typically I thought that my strategy worked really well, but then I find that it doesn't work for everybody. So figuring out how to customize the way in which you motivate people, the way in which you serve people, the way in which, if need be, you gently correct them and help them to improve, all of those things I think requires a high degree of judgment and wisdom. And it's the kind of thing it's what keeps me praying because so often I don't really know what the next step is and trying to pray and see what would the Lord have me to do.
Can you share a little bit about the future vision that you have for your school?
Yeah, Gordon is an amazing place and it's a great blessing to be there. Gordon has a vision to try and significantly serve the global church. And so our vision is that by 2020, we would have 20% of our student body would be international students. That would be unheard of a Christian institution worldwide. We think being in Boston, there's a real appeal for international students. We have always been globally focused. We've been a missionary sending school for a long time, but we think also there's great benefit for drawing people from around the world. So we have a policy where we provide merit scholarships for people around the world, and we have a location-blind policy for our scholarships. So if a student in Korea is eligible for a merit scholarship, they compete for the same dollars as a student in Texas or California. That's very unusual for an institution in the U.S. to have such an open approach, but we believe a real vision for the school is that Gordon could serve the global church. Our aim is that Gordon College would be the liberal arts college of choice worldwide for developing thoughtful Christian leaders.
That's a great vision to have. You mentioned earlier in our program that the Korean student population is one of the highest for your school.
Yeah.
Why is that?
We've had a great relationship with Korea for a long time. Our sister school, Gordon Commonwealth Theological Seminary, we were once the same institution, and we are now sister schools, has a great track record of training and developing Korean pastors. So I think that Korean pastors know of Gordon and they speak favorably of the school. Actually, currently, half of our international students are Korean passport holders.
Oh, wow.
So we've got a large segment of our student body who love Korea. And I think we've also had a great relationship here. So we have good connections with churches and we try to encourage that. But we certainly want more. So I hope that your audience will look. If you are interested in coming to college in the U.S., we hope that you will consider Gordon College. If the Lord's calling you to Gordon, we want you to be there. And so we want to create opportunities for them.
And is there a special Korean material or website that they could turn to find more information?
Absolutely. So it's just www.gordon.edu/Korea. We have a Korean website that's there that provides a helpful portal. You can find information about admissions and about the school and can learn more about Gordon College.
Okay. And is there any closing thought or just blessing that you want to speak into the Korean church for today?
The Korean church, I think, is really setting the pace for global Christianity. And so it's just a great blessing for us to be able to observe and encourage what we see happening in churches in this great country. It's also our great hope that Gordon could be a place that develops the next generation of the leaders of the church and of Korean society. And so it's our hope that as more of them come to know Gordon, in the end, that they'll be a great blessing to this great land. So thank you for having me here, Eddie.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. It was a blessing to have you with us.
Appreciate it.
Well, in this hour of great need for strong leadership, strong biblical leadership that is centered around the gospel, we're so thankful that God has protected the sacred foundation of wonderful schools like Gordon College that is committed to Scripture, that is committed to the Great Commission, that is committed to spreading the gospel to the ends of the earth. And we're so thankful for our guest today, Dr. Michael Lindsey, for taking the time to be with us and to share his heart and the mission of his school. And we hope that you as well were inspired, but also would consider to prayerfully support and send this next generation of leaders to be equipped with truth, with the Spirit of the living God in them, to guide them and lead them to the ends of the earth so that this next generation will truly follow hard and grow up strong in the ways of the Lord. So thank you again for your time and for joining us today. Goodbye. And from all of us at CGN TV, we thank you for watching.